Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 20th meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for Council standing or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. And with that, I will move on to any disclosures of pecuniary interest from the committee. I see none. So moving on to the consent items, are there any items from committee members wishing to pull or speak to? I see none. So with that, I would like to put forward all the consent items. Councillor Turner, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer. Oh, and Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and happy birthday. Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me.
Through you, Madam Chair, I wonder if I might just be able to ask a question of staff on 2.1, which is with respect to the delegated authority for heritage application permits or alteration permits. Just wondering, I see at the end we have the report from Latch, but does this seem consistent with Latch's process, and were they amenable to the revisions?
If I could go to, Mr. Gagnon, welcome. I didn't see you there.
Thank you. So I just draw your attention to the added agenda, and you do see the Latch's recommendation in support of the proposed amendments to the delegated authority bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? I see none. So with that, I'd like to put the three items, consent items, on the floor, and I do have a mover and a seconder.
Madam Chair, as my system is getting organized, I will vote yes.
Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And moving right along to our scheduled items, our first public participation meeting is 3.1. It is application by the City of London allowing farm gate sales on lands within the urban growth boundary. I am looking for a mover to open the PPM. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And with that, committee members, first of all, I'd like to ask the gallery if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this item. If you could just raise your hand, just to give me an idea. If there's anyone here from the public that would like to speak to this item. I don't see any, so I would like to then ask the committee if they would like a presentation or from the city. They would? Okay, Councillor Turner, and I will then go to staff for the presentation. Yes, Mr. Parker, welcome.
Result of the urban agriculture strategy that Council approved in November of 2017. It's called farm gate sales. At the present time, outside the urban growth boundary, in the agricultural designation, you're allowed to have stands out front of your farm, and you're allowed to sell products. But this is urban agriculture, which is a little bit different. It's within the urban growth boundary. It's targeted for vacant lands within the urban growth boundary. And it's a way to allow food to be grown on properties which haven't developed yet. They tend to be in non-agricultural zones. In this instance, we're looking at lands under the urban reserve zone and designation, which is a designation that's applied to lands that haven't developed yet. So what is urban agriculture? It's the practice of growing, processing, sharing, and distributing food in the city. And we feel it's an important component of London's social, cultural, educational, economic, and ecological system. So as I said, outside the urban growth boundary, which is this red line that goes around, in the agricultural designation, you're allowed to have retail sales of food. Within the urban growth boundary, currently, you're not allowed to have retail sales from those places where they grow food. So urban agriculture can take the form of personal gardens in your backyard. They can take the form of urban farms, and they can take the form of the city's community gardens. So all of these are occurring within the city's urban growth boundary. The urban agriculture strategy deals not only with the growing of food, but also the processing and distribution of food. And there's a number of key players in the urban agriculture strategy. The city, there's city support, and then there's the community at large. And this is intended to be community driven. We have a committee set up, the Urban Agriculture Working Committee, which identifies issues that come up from time to time with how food is grown, processed, and distributed. And the city is mainly there in a support role to help them. And this is one of those times that the city helps them to allow retail sales of food products close to the place where it's grown. So as I said, here's the goals of the urban agriculture strategy. So it deals with growing, processing, and distributing the food. And as I said, Council adopted this strategy in November of 2017. So the Farm Gate Sales Amendment implements one of the goals of the strategy to provide opportunities to actually sell food and distribute fresh food close to the general public without going to some sort of commercial establishment. The size of the farm gate sales establishment is similar in nature and scale to a roadside stand, as I said, on an agricultural property. And is intended to only sell produce only grown on the farm. It's not intended to have other retail goods for sale on the property. The amendment that we're recommending adds a new definition of farm gate sales. As you can see, the definition includes small scale. It includes selling only products that are grown on the farm. And then secondly, the amendment, what it does is it adds farm gate sales as a permitted use in the urban reserve zone. As I said, there's no agricultural zones within the City of London. So the next best zone that we have that allows for vacant land on which urban farms can be located is the urban reserve zone. This is leading up to a future amendment. We had some discussions throughout the process of preparing this amendment about allowing people who grow food on their own property in their own gardens to sell it. But there was a zoning bylaw regulation that stipulates that you can only have 2 sales, retail sales on your property per year, similar to a garage sale. And we want to open that up a bit, but in this case, we never included that amendment in this version, this go-around. And so we're going to come back with a future amendment to allow them to do that. It's to possibly allow any food grown on the property to be sold more than twice on a property. Also, in December, there'll be another report before you. This new definition that we prepared for farm gate sales is going to be applied to urban routes who are currently operating a urban farm at 21 Norland Ave. It is going a little bit behind this amendment because we had to give public notice of that amendment, so we needed more time to do that. So it's coming forward at the December 2nd meeting. And that's it. That's the farm gate sales amendments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any technical questions from the committee? Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much, Chair. A couple of questions, if I can. Firstly, through you, Chair, to staff, what's the big driver? What's really compelling this initiative to go forward? We obviously have retailers out there, farmers who retail through Covent Garden and through various chains and through their own distribution systems. What's driving this initiative here at this time?
One of the objectives of the urban agriculture strategy is to make food more accessible to people. So right now, they would have to grow their food, take it to a market somewhere else in the city and sell it at that location. But this is, the strategy actually says make it more accessible to people. Have it in more of a neighborhood type of function where you can sell food in the neighborhood and actually grown on the property. So it's just to make it more accessible to people.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure what making more accessible means. I'm not trying to suggest this is a bad idea, but I'm trying to understand how is food not more accessible? There's various, except for downtown where we don't have a retail location. How is food not accessible throughout the city with the various retail locations that we have? I think my sense is you mean something more than just that, because I'm a little bit confused by that comment that food is somehow not accessible. I think, is there something beyond that you're saying? Help clarify that for my understanding, please.
Well, Madam Chair, just to dive in a little bit here, an urban agriculture strategy was brought to council, and council approved the strategy. It was a fairly extensive public consultation process, and what people expressed is they wanted to grow food in their neighborhoods and wanted the opportunity to be able to sell it in their neighborhoods as well. There were a series, out of that urban agriculture strategy, there were a series of initiatives or actions that we indicated we would follow, and that sort of schedule of things was approved by council. So this is one of those things. We, as Mr. Parker pointed out, we have a steering committee which is made up of members of the community that are very heavily involved in this urban agriculture drive. And they're also moving things, helping us move things forward in priority. And this is one of the priority items. We also have, as Mr. Parker pointed out, a really good example of an urban farm that's inside the urban growth boundary on urban reserve lands. And there's an obstacle right now. That's really what this is removing a barrier, which is currently in the zoning bylaw, where somebody cannot sell food that they're growing on their urban farm in the urban growth boundary. And finally, because there's a number of initiatives here, one of them is being able to sell food that you grow in your garden. We know that food is also a great community binder. So it's not just about access to food in the way that a supermarket is, but people in a neighborhood growing food and being able to sell it legally on their driveway as part of a community type of event is something that we didn't want to get in the way of. And so again, removing those barriers.
So we are, just to remind the committee, technical questions for now.
Thank you. I'll keep it technical because it seems like we're looking at one situation in particular and trying to formulate a whole policy around that, which respectfully I gather has been and certainly has been dealt with to some degree. But a couple of questions. One is to do with consumer safety. I would say to you that as a family who has a bakery and a retail outlet and The health unit certainly pays a lot of attention to all retail establishments from a health and safety concern standpoint. To what extent would staff be, through you, Chair, would staff be concerned about how issues around health and safety of the products that are being sold be dealt with, since this is what we're trying to deal with now?
And if I can go to staff to ask that question, I know for now.
Through the chair, on the Urban Agriculture Working Committee, we have a member of the Middlesex London District Health Unit on that committee who advises us of any health concerns.
And if I may interrupt, I'm not sure where the question is going, but I just want to remind you that there is a committee member here that may have to, depending on where this conversation goes, recuse himself. Do I have that right, Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity. I am an employee of the Middlesex London Health Unit. Food inspection is within my portfolio. In past, have recused in certain circumstances. In this circumstance, since the item in the agenda hasn't mentioned the Middlesex London Health Unit, I haven't declared a pecuniary interest. I'll continue to watch the conversation. If there is a pecuniary interest, I'd say the definition of pecuniary means that I might financially benefit or be disadvantaged as a result of the discussion. I don't think we're in that situation right now, but I would just ask that we tread that sensitively if we could.
Mayor Holder? Oh.
If I could, I just want
yes.
to point out this is not processed food. This is actual product that's grown on the property, so there's a distinction there.
Well, respectfully, Chair, I'm not sure what the distinction is between food that is sold at Covent Garden Market, which comes out of whatever process that is, and that's not processed food, that comes out of the ground.
And if I, just to remind you, we're at technical questions right now. The technical question is...
I'm trying to stay on that, Chair, but I'm finding that when staff bring us back to a different issue, I'm trying to respond to the issue that they brought up. I'd rather stay with the technical points, hence why I was asking if we have one inspector, does staff feel that is sufficient for the health and safety of Londoners to deal with this this consumer product? We'll exclude the health unit or any other in this process, but is there sufficient inspection? And I would ask what the technical liability would be, since we've given permission for this to happen if someone was to get sick or lodge a complaint as a result of food that was purchased in the driveway of some urban dweller. I'd like to get a sense of that, please,
So
from a
the first-
liability standpoint.
The first question being, is there sufficient inspection? Is one inspector enough? And then the liability if something happens. Mr. Fleming?
Madam Chair, I think what Mr. Parker was saying, not that there is an inspector that was to be inspecting what's going on with respect to this initiative. It was just somebody that was on the steering committee that could provide intelligence to the group with respect to health and safety issues. But there are farm gate sales throughout the city in many different forms already. As Mr. Parker said, it's not uncommon to see those by the side of the road in the agricultural area. Part of this initiative is simply to allow for it within the urban reserve designation, where currently there's a barrier and you cannot. With respect to the smaller pieces, my understanding is you will see at certain places throughout the city, there are hawkers and peddlers, I believe is the licensing term, where people sell fruits and vegetables and flowers and those sorts of things. With the same sort of, I would suggest, health and safety type of issues that would go along with what we're proposing here. So my sense from what I've heard from the group that the work that my team's doing, there are no issues from a health and safety perspective of selling this kind of produce. As I said, it's not processed food where, for example, if they're preparing food and making relishes and those sorts of things, then there's a whole series of health and safety type of issues that do require attention that are separate from selling in this way.
Mayor Holder?
Thanks very much. That response, though, Chair, through you, does not give me as much confidence, because certainly with hawkers and peddlers licenses, to use that term, you know where they are because they've actually applied for a license, although from time to time, I can tell you, from flowers and other products, and flowers not consumables, just so you know, we at least know where they're supposed to be, whereas if we want to follow up, whereas if someone chooses to sell produce at the end of their driveway, we do not necessarily know when those happen unless by inspection, and I'm not confident that we have or want to get that kind of reinforcement of inspection. But a separate question maybe, and you'll tell me if this is a technical question, but I know when I think of Trails End and I think of the Western Fair District Farmers Market and I think of Covent Garden, those people, for their purpose, not only have licenses, but they pay taxes as well. Is that the intent of this as well? Is there any thought that these people would pay any form of tax on this, or is this just independent of all of that process?
The technical question is, are taxes applied to the sales for farm sale?
You're very
sales-
articulate, Madam Chair. I think you said it better than me.
Madam Chair, we would leave that to either, if we're talking about provincial tax, for example, to those that apply it, and similarly with respect to municipal taxes, if we're talking about real estate values, that would be done through the typical assessment.
So this amendment does not apply to any taxes?
Final comment relating to this, and then I think I'm done.
If I may, just keep it to technical questions
Yes.
for now. We can always follow up with comments later.
Fair enough. I asked the question earlier with respect to consumer safety and the health and safety concerns that are put upon retailers that are not put upon these individuals. And my concern from a technical standpoint is that that's not being observed in this case.
Councillor Squire, technical questions only.
Yeah, I did hear that. Through you, Madam Chair, and I think this is a technical question. So what I heard in the presentation was that if someone's in a residential area, has a farm, or it's growing tomatoes and stuff in their backyard, that there's some limit to them only being able to sell twice a year from that residential property. Then I heard from Mr. Fleming what I thought was something different, which is, well, we don't want to stop people in residential areas from having an event or selling produce from their house. So what I want to know is the phone calls that I received about this, and this is surrounding this technical question, I did get complaints from people who are saying, look, people are having farm sales on their driveway every weekend. Every Saturday, they're selling produce on their driveway. If all that produce comes from their own garden in their house, can they do that every weekend?
Madam Chair, I'm going to attempt to answer it, and I don't think I'm doing Mr. Parker any favors, but I'm going to try anyway. So the report identifies three different areas. One is farm gate sales, and what's being discussed there is more large-scale type of sale of produce, which you'll see in the agricultural area fairly regularly, but is not allowed in the urban reserve zone. So I'm not talking about necessarily residential areas, I'm talking about urban reserves. So that's sort of the first item there. That's the urban farm, where there's a regular sale of the produce from the farm on the site of the farm in the urban reserve zone. The second is in parks, neighborhood parks. So this is opening up the opportunity for more sale of produce that is grown by neighbors in their park spaces. And again, this is something that is seen as the urban agriculture strategy suggested. There's a great opportunity for food to be a social binder and something bringing people together, for people to be growing produce in their yards and then come together in the neighborhood park and sell it to their neighbors, is seen as a very positive thing from a community perspective. And then the third is with respect to people selling food on their driveway, a little bit like your garage sale. And so Right now, there are already provisions in place that allow you, I think, to have a couple of garage sales a year. And what we're saying is that may be too onerous in terms of selling food, and so we're trying to eliminate that regulation by saying, if you're selling food that you grew in your own yard, you can do that on your driveway without encumbrance in terms of the zoning bylaw, the use. And with respect to all of the other health regulations, that would be, those are regulations that we aren't dealing with from a planning point of view. They would be as they are right now through the appropriate channels that regulate health and safety of food.
Councillor Squire.
So just to clarify, is that one of the amendments that is coming before us today to change it from you can only sell from your driveway twice a year, your tomatoes in your backyard or whatever that might be? I like tomatoes, so I keep mentioning them. Or is that something we are going to look at possibly in the future? Because I'm not sure people realize, if it's coming right here today, I'm not sure people realize that.
It's not today. Mr. Parker was indicating there's a couple of amendments that are coming. One's very soon, which is the farm gate sales, the larger one. I think that was the next cycle of planning committee. And the question, as you said, of changing the regulations around selling food on your driveway, for example, that is something that is not here today. And there's a process, so we're looking for direction to get that going, and we'll have their normal process and engage the public on that before we come forward with that.
Thank you, that makes it quite clear for me.
Any further technical questions? I see none, so I would like a motion to close the public participation.
Anyone else?
Oh, is there anyone here? I'm sorry. Is there anyone here from the community that would like to speak? Please come forward. There's 2 microphones, stating your name and address if you wish. You do have 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Carter McCrindle. You wanted my address?
It's up to you, but
Oh,
you're
sure.
welcome to provide it.
Yeah, I live in Westmount, 181 McMaster Drive. So my question was, everyone seemed to be really concerned about if we do health and safety inspections on if we're going to start selling this more. I'm a little uninformed, so I'm wondering if we do health and safety inspections already on the current sale of like 2 times a year when you sell tomatoes from your own home, in your own garden.
You're welcome. For now, we'll follow up with the answer to your question, but you can continue with your comments.
Oh, you just want to know like how I feel about this?
Please, yes.
Oh, I don't know. It seems like a pretty good idea. I feel like it gives a good chance to farmers to make more money. They can sell more products if they're going to be putting their livelihood into, producing all these things every day. They might as well be able to sell them more often in an easier way to people right away. That's really all I got to say on the matter. Appreciate you guys giving me the chance. That's all, so yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to make a comment here regarding this item? Please come forward to the microphones. You do have 5 minutes. Feel free to state your name and address if you wish.
Perfect. So I'm Jeremy Horrell. I am a board member at Urban Roots London, so the not-for-profit farm that currently is in the City of London. And so what I encourage you to think about is when you look at farm gate sales, I heard a lot about markets. Markets are a place you can go to buy local food. What about experiencing your food? And I think that there's a connection that the community has lost often with experiencing their food, and having an urban farm and having farm gate sales as an opportunity for people to come, congregate, gather around food and experience that connection to the land, to other people, and to affordable food is really important. So that's all.
Thank you very much for those comments. And I'd like to ask if there's anyone else, please come forward with your name and address if you wish.
Good afternoon. My name's Jeff Lucas. I live at 85 Wilson Ave in Blackfriars. I grew up in London. I've been away for 40 years, and I moved back about 4 years ago and I retired. I got very excited when the Urban Ag Conference was put on. And from that, the roundtable talks through the Urban Ag strategy. I've been involved with farming and gardening for as long as I know. My grandparents had farms. I've been involved in a lot of community gardens and started them and farm and garden programs at different schools that my children went to. When I came back here, I got involved with urban ag. We have a group of us that are trying to start a group, Friends of Urban Ag London, that came out of that conference. And we've been meeting for the last 2 or 3 years. I put forward my name to be on the Urban Ag Steering Committee, and I think we've done, a lot of good work in the short time that we've been there and gone through a few planners. So I think it's that we really should support this, and to back up Jeremy's comments that, we think we know where our food's coming from if we buy it even in a marketer's store. And I just came a little bit late, but I heard the health and safety concerns. And if we look at all the problems that we've had with processed food, whether it's even fresh greens and packaged meat or whatever, it's just that people have to take personal responsibility, I think, and not rely so much on inspection, right? And I know there's a cost to that, so I'm not too worried about that. I always source out a farmer wherever I buy, and I've always belonged to, if I'm not growing my own food, and sometimes to supplement it, what's called CSA, Community Shared Agriculture, where I buy a share, and I help support the farmer and or gardener with the upfront costs. And since I come back, I was at Blackfriars for a couple of years in an allotment garden. But I've belonged to community gardens, which I find, again, with Jeremy, that's been talked about, it just creates a whole different dynamic. Whether you have a potluck or you're helping people grow their food or learning how to grow different things. And I think that's really important here. And we've talked lots in these conferences about food deserts or whatever, and I know many gardeners that donate some of their food, whether it's to the food bank or some of the food boxes that go out. So I just think it's very important and to keep this going and to spread that. And my last comment is that I've joined a group that we're starting an initiative. It'll be the first self-managed community garden, which will take the burden off the city because, there's approximately 20 community gardens now, and they can only start maybe one a year because of the soil testing and all the upfront costs, and then getting the soil prepared. So we took on this project in West Lyons, beside the food forest. It's been there a couple of years, and, we're just getting the soil ready, but it's exciting that, again, from the ground, and to help show people what can be done, and again, to take some of the financial burden off the city. And we still do all the things, whether we, again, you have to start with good soil to get good food. I just hope that people can, because we'll need to supplement, because it takes money every year to run a garden, whether it's seed or to, mulch or what have you. So it's important, I think, that we're allowed to do that. And, if there has to be some sort of inspection or some oversight, we're totally open to that. But the process to get bogged down just because of health and safety, I think, I know a lot more people that get sick on food that's been inspected than food that hasn't been inspected. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this item? Please come forward, stating your name, address if you wish, and you do have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jessica Cordes, and I live on Deveron Crescent in Pond Mills neighborhood. In the last 2 years, I've really become interested in urban agriculture, and in my first dive into urban ag in London, I found in 2017 that the strategy had come out. So since then, I've been following this issue pretty closely. In the past 2 years, growing my own garden, I have been able to provide almost all of my own vegetables over the course of the summer and into the fall, even eating a lot of preserved and frozen foods. So kind of echoing what some of these other folks have said about the connection to the food that comes from urban agriculture practices, I think is really key to understand that we're talking about more than just growing and selling food. We're also talking about building skills, building resiliency, and let's not leave climate change out of the conversation, because I think a strong urban agriculture strategy and a strong local food system is absolutely critical to addressing climate change, to mitigating its impacts by enhancing our soil, by improving biodiversity. And further, there's tons of benefits in the social side, building community, the social connections, the job skills that come from these types of grassroots projects that we have seen, like the Urban Roots and the Wood Street Food Forest, to name a couple in the city. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes about with the garage sale type of sales, because I have far too much produce on my hands. And it'd be nice as an urban farmer to be able to sell a little bit of that, make a small profit. I don't think many folks in the city are looking to have urban agriculture become like a main source of income, but I think it's a nice way to connect people and to earn a small income on the side. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll ask again if there's anyone that would like to speak to this item. Please come forward to one of the microphones. I see none. I will therefore go to the committee and ask to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And if I, just before I go to the committee, there was a question asked, and I'll ask it again, and I will go to staff about the health safety inspection. Will there be any done through this process?
Madam Chair, certainly you wouldn't want city planning organizing that or making calls on that. That's something that we would leave to the proper agencies that deal with the regulation of food inspections. So as I've said previously, I just, we'd leave it up to them. And this is a regulation relating to permissions for land use and what you can do on your land.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fleming. And I'll go to the committee and remind the committee this is an amendment for a zoning bylaw to bring into conformity our official plan on urban reserved land within the urban boundary. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback in the public participation meeting. I think this is a reasonable change, so I'm willing to move the recommendation at this point. I will say, I think allowing this kind of commercial activity in urban reserve lands is removing a barrier that's preventing people from being able to do something that's financially sustainable, right? So part of running these urban farms is you need to be able to sell some of the produce. Some of it can be used for other purposes, but if you're going to be financially sustainable in the long term, you need to be able to have some commercial activity happening. This is the way that cuts out the various middlemen in the process, and you can get sort of low price food conveniently right at the place where you're doing the growing. So I think it makes sense. Obviously, it can't be done everywhere in the city. There's only a certain number of places really that are even urban reserve where this could happen, and so I support the change. On the broader issues around inspections and what the food safety regime is in Ontario, I'm not super familiar with it, but I do know that the requirements and the regulations at the provincial level apply to farm gate sales. So I don't think the province cares where the farm gate sales are happening. If they're happening in an agricultural zone or they're happening in an urban reserve zone, they're going to apply. And I mean, we can all go and look that up, I think, on the government's website. But they do say specifically it applies to farm gate sales. That's what we're talking about here, is allowing farm gate sales in a different part of the municipality. And I think that's the change we're dealing with. I support that particular change. I think the other questions related to that are reasonable questions to be asking, but they're not really related to the zoning change which we're making now. So hopefully there's support for that, because I think it's a good idea.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee? Councillor Squire.
I'm happy to support this as far as it goes. I'm a little concerned because of how the discussion went about having people selling sort of every week from their driveway, produce from their house. In my business, you always look to the people who don't do things properly. And I think you raise the possibility of having a fellow who goes to Metro every weekend, buys a bunch of produce and sets up in his driveway. And then the enforcement of that is horrendous, trying to prove that the tomatoes came from Metro and they didn't come from the backyard. So I think we have to go through a really rigorous process and not just assume we're dealing with people who are all doing things correctly. There's also the issue of, do people buy houses in a residential area to have what is essentially a small commercial entity occurring continuously in it? But I'll leave those for another day, but because they were raised, I wanted to comment.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the comments I raised may not have been technical, but I think they're practical. And just to reinforce a couple of things, I think there are issues around health and safety on behalf of Londoners that I haven't seen addressed in this presentation. Second thing is that, I'm very mindful of the retailers who are out there, farm retailers who pay, if they own their property taxes, but more specifically, if they're in retail, they've got their health and safety issues they must deal with. If they're in a retail environment, they also pay taxes on various products that they use, and the inspection process is much more detailed. And I look at this from a fairness standpoint. I know this is a zoning issue, but this isn't just one business. This is now going to impact potentially any residential unit in the city that wants to do this. And look, there's going to be a number of practical situations where it doesn't occur, but I was looking at the pictures on the screen, and no backyard that I have ever seen looks like the ones that were on the screen, I have to tell you. So you know what it's going to mean is it's going to mean that folks that want to do that, and look, people do that now, and if they want to do that for the experience, do that to share, do that to support the food bank, whatever they might do, I think there's that. But I think there are issues of liability, I think there are issues of health and safety, and I think there are issues of fairness, and I bring those out and express my concern accordingly.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To speak to the Mayor's comments, I think if we're going to take a look at a food safety perspective, and I can bring a bit of a lens to this, and I'll do that while walking a very thin line. There's a marked difference between processed and prepared foods versus grown foods. We're talking about the latter, not the former. There are some critical control points within the processing and distribution of foods, such as what the food source was and whether there's a potable water source, the storage of the food, the thawing, cooling, and cold handling of that food, preparation and handling, whether there's opportunities for cross-contamination, and the cooking, reheating, and hot holding of foods. So those are the areas where risk can be introduced into the food. In terms of raw source foods, fruits and vegetables, the biggest concern would be specific to the water source that's used to irrigate those, and what was used for fertilizers, whether there was an E. coli source that could be introduced into those foods like lettuces and things like that. Backyard agriculture really doesn't have high risks for those things, and those are risks that exist on any farm and are handled by proper washing prior to consumption. But the biggest concerns really are with mostly around animal products, and animal husbandry was a significant component that was removed from the urban agriculture strategy when we discussed it back in 17. And so we're not talking about backyard chickens or the distribution of eggs or milks, and those would be food products that would carry a fair amount of risk with them if distributed from backyards in an unregulated or unmonitored fashion. Tomatoes and peppers and things like that are not foods that carry really high risk with them. I think the speaker that spoke about how urban agriculture plays an important role, and I would encourage a review of the urban agriculture policy to see what was actually done, because there was some very good work done about that, and that is the policy of the city, and that is why this is being brought forward at this time. So for us to kind of pull back from that now would be contrary to policy that's already been established and had been well thought out and deliberated. So I would urge my colleagues to support it, but I mean, from a community building, from a climate change perspective, from just kind of moving away from our need to have significant distance transportation for agriculture. Most of our fruits and vegetables come from the Ontario Food Terminal in Toronto. Somebody's got to drive out to the OFT, grab all that food, and then bring it back here. That's a 400-kilometer trip just in transportation alone before the food even gets to the Ontario Food Terminal. That's really contrary to our declaration of a climate emergency, and anything we can do to support local should be done. With respect to the concerns about tax avoidance, anybody who does any independent raising of funds is required to report those revenues to CRA. There are a number of opportunities to raise revenues that would not be through formal channels, through a formal employment process, or through a formal business license, but that can be addressed through independent filings through CRA, and that's every citizen's obligation. So in terms of fairness, I think that's easily addressed, and that's the appropriate way to do it, but it's not our measure here. The overall oversight for agriculture is done through the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food, and that's probably somebody that we could loop into the discussion at some point, but I think that was contemplated as we went through the urban agriculture strategy to make sure that these were measures that were consistent with safe food handling processes, did not pose any risk to citizens that might consume it, and that we would have a sound and appropriate policy for the framework of what we're seeing here today, and then the measures that are being brought forward at future times as well. So, as I said, I'd encourage you to support this.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as Councillor Squire said, this is pretty easy to support. I will definitely be supporting it. I like that Part B is really looking into it more before. It's not initiating anything tonight. It's about directing staff to initiate zoning bylaw amendments to look at these sort of things. So right now it's allowed, sales on your driveway are allowed twice a year. We don't know what staff will come back with as a recommendation, if there will be limits or whatever, and that will be for us to decide when it comes back. But, you know, going along with a lot of what Councillor Turner said, when we came up with this urban agricultural strategy, as others have said, there was quite a long and extensive and in-depth public engagement process. There were many people involved, including, I believe, our Agriculture Advisory Committee was involved in this as well. And there are many people on that advisory committee that are professional farmers, and they were involved in this urban strategy. So I also want to point out that the London for All report, the report to address poverty in London, sort of coincided or came just before this strategy was finalized. And there, under the food security section, there are many recommendations that are compatible with the urban agricultural strategy. And I'll just point out 7.2, support campaigns that promote healthy local food, expand local food literacy programs for all ages to increase knowledge of affordable, healthy food options, support local policies and strategies that encourage more community gardens and urban farms, work with farmers, so a number of these things. So yeah, we do have a lot of food in London. We just like Canada in general, we are a very abundant community and nation, but yet it's not always available to everyone. And part of the urban agricultural strategy is to see that people having that opportunity to access that abundance, whether it's growing their own food or sharing it with their neighbors or communities, working in a collective kitchen, cooking food together, using food that's grown at that collective kitchen. There are all these great things, and the urban agricultural strategy is a broader tool to achieve some of that stuff. I know a lot of what I learned about poverty through the work on the poverty panel was you could have two families living side by side with the exact same income, and one family considers themselves poor and the other doesn't. And a lot of what sets those two families apart is that ability to access fresh food, whether it's and a lot of times through growing it in their own gardens and knowing how to prepare it, knowing how to stretch a pound of potatoes. A pound of potatoes fed my family, 14 children, very, very well. We ate a lot of potatoes growing up. And I know with my mom herself as an example, different time, different place, different era, grew up in abject poverty, but did not feel poor because her father hunted, fished, and grew vegetables, baked breads, and that sort of thing. So if you had two families, I love the idea of the sharing of food grown individually in a park or in another setting. Maybe I grow tomatoes, my neighbor grows corn. So sharing our crops together is a great way to see that abundance spread around. So in general, I love the urban agricultural strategy. I like the recommendation here today, and I'm going to support it.
Thank you, committee members, and I want to thank the public also for coming out and expressing your thoughts. It is also very important as we go through this process. And I too will be supporting the amendment to the zoning bylaw to bring in the official plan. Supporting the urban agricultural strategy has been, a lot of work has gone into that, and this is just part of the process as we move forward, supporting not only the strategy, but sustainability in our city. So with that, I also want to remind everyone too, we will be having amendments coming back as we go through this process as well. So do I have a motion and a seconder? So if we can vote?
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-1.
And moving along to our next public participation meeting, which is an application for 2498 to 500 to 510 Main Street in Lambeth. I'd like to look for a motion to open the public participation meeting. Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And we have a quick presentation from Mr. Smith. Welcome.
It'll be quick. It's an application at 2498, 2500, and 2510 Main Street, which is on the south side of Main Street, just east of Colonel Talbot Road. The property is designated Main Street Commercial. Main Street Commercial allows for mixed-use developments with pedestrian-oriented development along the front, commercial-oriented development along the front, and with some offices above. The London Plan designation is also Main Street Commercial. It has again, reiterates the permissions that we want to see in a main street, which is pedestrian-oriented development, mix of uses, and an overall good design that fits within the concept of a main street commercial corridor. There's a third one that's not up there, which is the Southwest Area Plan, but the Southwest Area Plan also reiterates what's in the official plan and the London Plan about having, yet again, pedestrian-oriented development and mixed uses. The proposed would allow for one commercial office building 10 meters in height. That's 2 stories with commercial at grade, and 2 3-story townhouse buildings, also 10 meters in height in the rear of the property for a total of 16 units. The proposed site plan looks like this, with the commercial office structure at the front and the residential buildings in the back. The zoning itself requires the residential buildings be in a rear yard. Rear yard is the portion of the front lot behind the back of the office building and the front building. So basically that's where it has to be. These lots are very deep. If you recall, it's got quite a bit of depth back to Broadway, and then Broadway has a fairly large buffer between that. The 10-meter heights are actually lesser than what's permitted as of right today in the BDC. The BDC zone allows for 12 meters and 75 units per hectare. This development comes in at 10 meters and 60 units per hectare. And the zoning bylaw itself will recognizes those special provisions, as well as special provision to allow for townhouses in the rear, because townhouses isn't specifically identified as a use in the BDC zone, but dwelling units, converted dwelling units, apartments, all those other forms of development and dwelling types are permitted. So this is just allowing for that form of use in this area. These are the elevations. The top elevation is the elevation that will be along the pedestrian corridor. It will frame the street and provide 4 commercial uses at grade and office uses above. The lower one is the townhouses. As you can see, they are 3 stories, but essentially the first story is taken up with a garage and an entranceway with the 2 stories above it, with usually the living space and the bedrooms above. And again, that's a maximum of 10 stories, which is significantly less than what is permitted as of right on the site as we speak today. You went to the urban design peer review panel. The panel generally supports the whole mix of uses in the commercial along the grade. They had a few suggestions just with this way it looks and stuff, but again, all that will be taken care of through the site plan stage, and those refinements are appropriate at that stage and at that time. So at the end of the day, we're looking at an amendment to the zoning bylaw from a business district commercial zone to a business district commercial special provision zone, which permits the 10 meters maximum height, a density of 60 units per hectare, and a parking space of 61 parking spaces for all uses on the site, as well as those townhouses in the rear unit. The 61 parking spaces for all the uses, if we're going to, a quick discussion about that. 90 is required, but as this isn't a Main Street commercial area, and 2 parking spaces are provided for each one of the townhouses, 1 in the garage and 1 in the parking, 1 in the driveway, they do have a minimum of 2 spaces per, so the dwellings themselves have sufficient parking. And the reduction of the parking along the Main Street does promote pedestrian orientation and that carless form of space that is appropriate in the Main Street commercial. So those are my comments, and I have answered any questions if required.
Any technical questions from the committee? I see none. I'd like to go to the applicant, if the applicant is here. Welcome.
My name is Ben McCauley. I'm here representing the applicant. We're agreeable with staff's recommendation. We have no further comments at this time, but I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Thanks.
Thank you. Any technical questions of the applicant? I see none. I would like to go to the public now. If there's anyone that would like to come to speak to this application, please come forward to the microphones. And I will ask again if there's anyone here. Please come forward. I see none. So I would like a mover to close the public participation meeting. Mayor Holder, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Questions, comments from the committee? If the committee would allow me, would like to, just from the chair, make a few comments about this application. It is in Lambeth. It is, I think, an application that I'd like to see a little bit more of. We've just finished the construction of Main Street. I know the community has gone through a lot the past 2 years, but now it is going to open opportunities for applications and intensity and development along the Main Street. I think it's an appropriate application and very supportive. I do have a quick question, though. If I can go to Mr. Smith, just if you could touch upon the height. I know it was a concern from a member.
Yes, there was one one letter that was submitted had concerns about the height, but as noted, it is only 10 meters in height. The existing BDC zone actually allows for 12 meters in height and would allow for apartment uses, so it's actually lower than what could be permitted as of right. And further, the fact that it's a flat roof in the rear yard at 10 meters with a setback that meets the requirement of the zone, there is significant buffering between this development. It is a good transition from the commercial at the front along Main Street into the residential units along, or residential dwellings along Broadway in the rear and to the south.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'll move the recommendation.
Mayor Holder, seconds.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving along to our next public participation meeting, which is an application for 666 to 670 Wonderland Road North. I'd like to open the public participation meeting. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. Committee members, before I go to the committee, I would like to go to the gallery and just, if I can ask if there's anyone here that would like to speak to this application, just raise your hand. I see none, so I will go to the committee. Committee members, would you like a presentation from staff? See no need. Thank you. I think we will forego staff's presentation. I would like to go to the applicant. If the applicant is here, please come forward.
Hi, my name's Caitlin Crowley. I'm here with Zelenka Priamo on behalf of the applicant. We are in support of staff's recommendation, and thank you, Melanie, for the staff report and your work on the file. And we're here to answer any questions.
Any technical questions from the applicant, committee members? I see none. Thank you. And with that, I would like to ask a mover to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And I'd like to go to the committee. This is a recommendation or a request to amend the permit to permit a medical and dental office within an existing retail commercial outlet. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was addressed in the report talking about how this becomes one of those sites for the transit village and transit intensification. I recognize that this is really specific for one use probably for that site, and they're just looking for the zoning to that. In terms of the kind of the future of this site, I'd consider that to, for lack of a better word, perhaps to be underutilized, and having larger development potential. Does the recommendation here fit in with what future plans might be in terms of development opportunities on that site as transit village and intensification occurs?
Madam Chair, I would tend to agree that this site is capable of more usability in a transit village. We've seen similar situations like this where we're just trying to recognize what exists and allow it to continue in in its existing form, but recognizing that when it's time to redevelop, we would want to see in alignment with the London plan. So in this case, it's the height that's not necessarily in conformity with the London plan. We'd want to see greater intensity here, but the uses are in conformity. And for that reason, the recommendation limits the uses to the existing buildings. So that way, there's no freestanding one-story medical dental office opened on the site. Use it until it's time to redevelop, and when it's time to redevelop, then do it in conformity with the London plan.
Thank you. That's helpful and a good answer.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I'll move the recommendation.
And I'm looking for a seconder. Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving along to our next public participation meeting, which is on bird-friendly development. I am looking to the committee to open the PPM. Councillor Turner, seconded by Mayor Holder.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Maitland, welcome.
So the file in front of us this evening relates to bird-friendly regulations, changes we're looking for with regards to the site plan control bylaw, and also a number of other things that are in the works that will seek to create more bird-friendly community in the city. So to start off, the origin of this file, in the fall of last year, 3 committees, EPAC, ACE, and AWAC, so that's the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee, the Advisory Committee on the Environment, and the Animal Welfare Advisory Committee, collaborated to create a set of draft guidelines around creating a more bird-friendly city. Those regulations, or sorry, those guidelines formed kind of the basis for the research that we did, the changes that are in front of you, and some of the other things that are in the works that I'll be discussing this evening. The regulations that we're proposing that are approved for changes to the site plan control bylaw were circulated in draft in January, and then I'll walk you through some of the things that have happened since then. So through those original guidelines that I was speaking to, there are kind of 4 rough things that, 4 rough groups of things that could be addressed within the city to create more bird-friendly development, more bird-friendly community. The first was lighting design. That's what the regulation changes in front of you tonight are about. The second is glass facade design, so that speaks to preventing bird strikes through measures to make glass more visible to birds and prevent them from striking. This last 2 speak to the issues around lighting that happen in a more general sense with birds. So particularly with migratory birds, what we see is with sky glow, which is light focused in, or shone up into the sky, light pollution in general, we see confusion in migratory birds and a lack of, and they get confused and less and less of them migrate successfully. So although that's not something we're specifically addressing in terms of hours and migratory season, it is something that we are addressing through other measures. So the first piece, this is the change that's in front of you, is to create bird-friendly lighting design through the site plan control bylaw. So this would affect any, or assuming it's approved, would affect any application that comes in requiring site plan from here on forward. And it does 2 things, the regulations. The first is to create a full cutoff. That means basically there's a cap such that none of the light that is provided by any lighting on a site shines into the sky. Another way to refer that is zero up light. And so we're setting that as standard. So at site plan, at the site plan stage, generally speaking, we are provided with photometric plans that show how the site's going to be laid out, and it also shows the lights that are used. Currently, we look at how that light affects neighboring properties, but using that information that's available to us in terms of the lighting design itself, we can guarantee this bird-friendly development. So the second piece, which came up in discussion following the January 21st draft bylaw that was in front of you, was around glass facade design and ways to discourage bird strikes, which result in bird deaths or bird injury. And there are a number of possible approaches that were discussed. So things like UV glass, pattern or frittered glass, a number of other things that are at times difficult to pronounce. So what our proposal was in some of the conversations we've had in the last couple of months with both members of the ecological committee specifically, and the development industry, was concerns around how do we come up with something that was implementable from a city side, buildable from a development side, and has the most recent ecological research. So we did hear from the developers that they were concerned how they would actually implement this, and we did hear from the ecological community from a couple individuals that despite the fact that we based our regulations off some of the most current regulations already in Ontario, that there were still some even more recent research that was raising concern. So what we're proposing through the recommendation is to establish a working group and basically get all those parties on the table to make sure that when we do have site plan regulations in place, which we would bring forward at a further date, that we would have something that at the city we can implement, knowing that it's going to be built and knowing that we have the most recent ecological research to back it up. So this kind of the second half of the guidelines that were originally created by the three advisory committees relate to lighting hours and migratory season. And so the idea here was how do we, or sort of their request was, can we make buildings in London turn their lights off, particularly the migratory season, because that's when birds are most sensitive, but basically overnight. And what we did through our background research, talked to our partners in the bylaw enforcement and said, is there any actual measure we have to do to enforce this, to just kind of determine whether it was even a possibility? And the short answer was no. So the other challenge for us as a site plan group is how do we make sure that this affects all those buildings that are done? So, you know, site plan, we see over 100 applications a year, but there are thousands of buildings in London. We have all sorts of tall glass towers that are lit up at night downtown that are not affected by the site plan control. So the idea we have going forward is to create a communications push that ties in with other environmental messaging. So if you think of Earth Hour, turn your lights off for an hour in April. I mean, for these big building owners, this messaging that we have, that it saves you money, it saves you money, it saves on carbon emissions, and also it's saving birds. So I think we have the ability to work that in with those other messages that are already going out. It gives us that ability to target existing buildings that are already done. And that work is already, we've started the conversation with communications to prepare that. The idea being that we'll be able to get something out in time for the migratory season in March of next year. So the recommendation in front of you, the first portion of it is those site plan control bylaw changes to make general objective changes that encourage bird-friendly development, specific to lighting, and then the requirement for that full cutoff and zero up lighting, which eliminates that sky glow that is the biggest issue for those migratory birds. The reality in talking with the development community is this is good lighting design, so this is something that they should be really doing task lighting anyways. It's in everyone's best interest. The second two recommendations, the first is to have those further conversations around the glass facade design piece to make sure that we can come back to you with regulations that we know are implementable. And then the third portion of the recommendation is to undertake that public awareness portion to address those buildings that aren't good in site plan because they've been built and they're already, in a lot of instances, creating much of the sky glow that we see right now. So in terms of next steps, just one more time, the lighting is the portion that's in front of you tonight. The working group will be established with your support. That's my job tomorrow morning when I get back. And then communications, we're going to refine that with them and launch it in time for the migratory season in the spring. Thank you.
Technical questions. Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. I wasn't going to comment, but just a couple of things that came to mind. I didn't see it here, and perhaps it was just me, but how many birds in London do we lose per year as a result of lighting challenges?
I don't have an exact number. The number that was quoted to us at the last meeting of EPAC is it's in the hundreds of millions within North America. Obviously, that's not specific to London, but it's what is that, 8 figures, 9 figures?
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that's not credible. I'm not sure how you measure that, and I just wondered for us to, I know we're just trying to fine tune the aspects of this, but I'm wondering, I think it's a noble effort. It's not just for the birds, but I would tell you that it's, I'm just trying to understand what the impact in London is, and so there's been no measurable study, I guess, is what I'm asking through you, Chair.
Mr. Yeoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the advisory committees, as Mr. Maitland mentioned, are the ones that brought this forward. There is a member of one of the advisory committees who's actually doing his PhD research in this area. He hasn't actually completed and fleshed out the full study yet for the city, but they are working on it actively. But to your question, we don't have a full London number for this.
So again, we're suggesting then that this is anticipatory in terms of the challenge that might occur as it relates to the safety of birds and migrations and the like. Is that correct, through you, Chair?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we believe that it will be impactful and helpful, but we don't actually have a quantifiable measure related to the policy that's before you.
Any other technical questions from the committee? I see none. I will go to the gallery and ask anyone here that would like to speak to this application, just come forward with your name, address if you wish, and you have 5 minutes.
Hi.
Welcome.
My name is Brendan Samuels. I'm the student at Western University that was just mentioned. I do my PhD at Western, and my doctoral research is about bird window collisions specifically. So I realize that I have 5 minutes, and so if I start to rant and go on and on, please do interrupt me. I prepared several comments I had about the document that was circulated, but I'm also happy to speak to any technical questions. As was mentioned, my research is not completed yet, of course, but I would describe myself as probably one of the most knowledgeable people in London about this issue. I can also say with confidence I am the person in London who has documented the most individual collisions with windows here. In fact, just walking around today, I picked up 8. And walking to this very meeting at this building, there was a dead bird on the ground just outside here. And I brought it because I wanted to make a point about this. It's hard to see from down there, but actually the bag is a little bit foggy. There's condensation in here. And the reason for that is because, in fact, the majority of bird window collisions are thought to happen during the daytime. And that bird was still warm when I found it. Now, I want to speak to the artificial light at night issue, and just acknowledge that what's been proposed here is incredibly sensible. It's really common sense policy. Within Ontario, it's comparable to similar stuff in Toronto, but really looking broader into the United States, there's many municipalities that have lighting design recommendations like this. Speaking to how these affect the lighting issue affects birds, the collisions with buildings problem is certainly substantial, but artificial lighting at night actually alters the timing of their migration, the timing of their breeding, even the timing of their calling to each other at dusk and at dawn. It's also not just about birds. I mean, entire ecological systems are disrupted by artificial light at night. And in here, in section 1.3, it says, yeah, this is also about addressing human health concerns. So I know that's sort of beside the point, but I felt that that is important background information for the committee for you guys to consider. To provide you with a little bit more context, and this relates to your question about the scope of this problem, I'm not sure if you've seen recent headlines, but we've lost about 1/3 of our breeding birds in North America in the last 50 years. 1/3. That amounts to about 3 billion breeding birds. But actually, that's not the number of birds. That's the number of birds in the population at any given time able to reproduce and continue those populations' growth. And that's a real problem. Birds are incredibly important for our ecological systems. The number one reason that birds die is habitat loss and climate change. Those are sort of indirect causes. Direct causes, the worst is cats. And in fact, in London, we have issues with feral and free-roaming cats. and important work is being done about that as well. Collisions with windows on buildings is number 2. So as was mentioned, hundreds of millions of birds per year are estimated to die in Canada and the United States. In my personal opinion, I don't know how important it is how many die in London, because the birds that are here are in Costa Rica in 2 weeks, right? These are birds that migrate across the entire North American continent, sometimes even to South America. So these are not London's birds per se. The ones that live here year-round are resident birds. They're less likely to actually hit windows, according to current research. So again, feel free to cut me off if this is becoming too long. There's a couple of other minor things in here that I wanted to bring to the meeting. The first is that London has actually been designated as the host city for the American Ornithological Society. This is a tremendously important meeting of ornithologists. That's happening in 2021. I think it would be wonderful if we can have this policy in place for when that comes. Sorry, just a moment. Okay. So in this document, in a few places, the high-rise buildings come up. And from the wording here, and I think public perception, these big glass buildings are considered the problem, when in fact, they're thought to make up about 1% of collisions with structures. High-rise buildings are not the issue. It seems to be predominantly low-rise buildings and homes that make up 90% of collisions. And so in thinking about this policy, I mean, those buildings at night in the downtown core that are very tall and emitting light, like certainly that contributes to light pollution, but I really don't think those are the priority for saving the most birds. One thing that I was not entirely clear from
Sorry to interrupt, but you are at 5, so if you could finish off. No, you can just finish off.
Oh, sure. Anyway, I'll leave it there. If you have any further questions for me, I'm happy to participate in this working group. Again, this is a fantastic effort by the city, and I hope to see it come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and great to follow Brandon and talked about cats and lower buildings on this. I'm Mike Wallace. I'm with the London Development Institute. We are at, I never remember the number, 562 Wellington Street, Suite 203. We've been, first of all, let me thank staff for their approach to our industry. I know it was brought here in January of last year in terms of the bylaw you're seeing in front of you, and over the last number of months, over the spring and summer, we've had a number of meetings and we had discussions about what we'd like to see. And from our perspective, our industry is okay with the changes in terms of what's being proposed here in terms of lighting and actually supporting of it. The one thing that that we would ask is that once we get familiar with what the issues are and understand, and staff here at City Hall understand what works and what doesn't, and what's needed, and if an application comes in and it meets that criteria, that it doesn't have to be circulated over and over again. If we meet what your requirements are, it should not need to be circulated. Every time something gets circulated somewhere else, it costs time, effort, and money, and makes your affordability issue go up every single time. So we're happy with what's being proposed. We're more than interested in the working group that Brandon, I sit beside Brandon most often at EPAC meetings, and I try to absorb some intelligence from him, but it doesn't really happen that way. But you have some very good experts right here in the community volunteering their time to give us the information that we need to make the appropriate recommendations to you on this bird issue. So we're happy to be working on the working committee that's coming forward that you have to call us tomorrow morning about. And other than that, if there was any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this application? I see no one else, so I'll go to the committee. Looking for a motion to close the PPM. Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Committee, I'd like to go to Councillor Squire.
I'm happy to support the recommendation. It's tremendously helpful to have the points of view that you need at a public participation meeting. So Mr. Wallace came to indicate that the industry is fine with this, but I'm sorry I forgot your last name, but your first name's Brandon Samuels. It's really nice to have a real scientist here, not a Google scientist here. I hope you know what I mean by that. I was really impressed with what you said, and particularly, if you had have not said it, and I would have been allowed to ask, I would ask you, well, what about cats? Because I've heard they're a problem too, and you actually were right on top of that. So I always say that the resources we have at Western in terms of the science and the real application of science are essential, and it was really helpful that you were here tonight, so thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with Councillor Squire's comments. There's something in Mr. Wallace's letter that I'd read through, and was kind of curious about specifically around how the circulation would occur through advisory committees. I think that sounds appropriate. Though one part, there's a paragraph that says that in addition, we believe the same criteria for circulation should also apply to the city ecologist. In these circumstances, it seems like the person who would best oversee the application of this standard would probably rest within the city ecologist's office, but I could be wrong. So I'm not sure. More of the point is that I'd like to just make sure that this lands in the appropriate hands for the best review to make sure that the standard is met. If the suggestion that circulation is somewhat restricted or reduced as a result of that. So that was the one component, and I think as Councillor Squire said, it's helpful to have Mr. Samuel's comments here as well, and in consideration. I hope you'll take the bird with you, though. It looked like staff might be preparing to respond to that, so I'll provide.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, it would be the expectation that all the applications would go through the ecologist. That's just part of how we do business, and the ecologist is part of the development services team. However, the level of scrutiny may not be as much. If they don't meet those markers that Mr. Wallace identified, then certainly that would be where there's a more detailed lens, and then kicked over to EPAC as well.
Thank you. I think the comment from Mr. Samuels was quite helpful too, talking about low-rise buildings. It wouldn't have been top of my radar to think of that, except every time I'm sitting in my family room and I hear one go off my window, and thinking more consciously about measures I can take to make that less frequent. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Are there any other comments from the committee? I see none. So I'm looking for a motion to the recommendation that we are amending the bylaw, adding these two sections. We're also going to be having a further public participation meeting, and we'll be directing staff for to undertake that public awareness that is also very important. Thank you very much for the public comments. I do appreciate them. And with that, Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving along to our next item, which are items for direction, 4.1. We are receiving the 11th report of the Advisory Committee of the Environment. Looking for a mover, Councillor Cassidy. And a seconder, Councillor Squire, and comments from the committee. I see none, so if we can vote. Councillor Turner.
Yes, so with respect to 5.3 and the terms of reference, I was I think I support recommendation A. Recommendation B, I might ask perhaps through you to the clerk for some thoughts as to that. Recognizing again that the parameters within the terms of reference is very specific to include a membership position from two specific institutes, but then going to a very, very broad category by just saying a representative from Western University with no departments specified. I'm not sure if that meets the representative constituency concerns that comprise the terms of reference for the committee.
I'm not sure. Is there anyone here that can answer that question? City Clerk.
Through you to Madam Chair, we did have a discussion with some members of the advisory committee regarding this, and we did, from a staff level, express concerns with the change. I believe that what we recommended to them is if there was someone beyond that individual that at any point in time, people can attend meetings as non-voting members and can be appointed to subcommittees as non-voting members. So we were not necessarily supportive of this change.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I could remove this clause and refer it back to the committee for more specificity. I'm not sure stating Western University, are they a representative of the administration? Are they a representative of the faculty? Are they representative as the student body? It's a little ambiguous as to what the purpose was. And I think if we have a specific, the non-voting members are supposed to be resources to the committee. Not just general constituents. And so there should be an expertise that's brought to it. And so I think this recommendation isn't completely in line with what the terms of reference seeks from its non-voting members. So I'd like to have the chance to refer that clause back to the committee for further consideration.
And that is a motion and seconded by Mayor Holder. Do I have a seconder? Oh, Mayor Holder.
Sorry.
I remember now.
Sorry. Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Next up, we have 4.2, which is a draft affordable housing.
Got the rest of these report.
Oh, sorry, the rest of the report, receiving the rest of the report. Jumping ahead of myself a little bit.
That was just one clause.
Hold on. We just need to vote on receiving it.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
And now we can move on to 4.2, which is the draft affordable housing community improvement plan and key considerations for program guidelines. Any comments from the committee? We're going to be circulating it and receiving it. And there is a presentation. Mr. Fleming, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to tee it up very quickly and then over to Mr. Macbeth, who I wanted to compliment, has done a tremendous job on this. It's a very complicated space. And while I'm at it, I want to say that this has been a collaboration with a number of others. I see Mr. Turcott from the Housing Development Corporations in the gallery today. Housing Development Corporations work closely with us on this, as well as members of homelessness prevention and housing and others in the at the city under Ms. Datersbeer. What you're receiving today is an understanding that this council has put a high priority on providing affordable housing, and this is a tool. It should be considered that. This is just one layer, an opportunity to provide a tool to facilitate and encourage and incent affordable housing. And the last thing I'll say is what we're bringing to you is a community improvement plan that will create the tool, but how much you want to fund that tool is something that you'll be dealing with through your multi-year budget. And so that discussion is to come. You'll get a sense of that through the conversation today, but what we really want to focus on today is creating the tool and getting your feedback. As you'll see from Mr. Macbeth, the next step will be to get this out, circulate it, and come back early in the new year if that's the direction the committee wants to go. Thank you.
Mr. Macbeth.
Thank you, through the chair.
Just as a reminder, you do have 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Boy. Where is this coming from? It is indeed in the strategic plan, implementation of the London plan, as well as the housing stability plan. That is the new name for the homeless prevention and housing plan, which will be coming to you imminently. Again, that is part of the coordinated approach that we have been having. So this is, again, a range of tools within a toolkit. It is one piece of it. It won't address London Middlesex community housing or replace their regeneration plan or funding for that. This does not address housing for the homeless or those most in need of shelter types of housing. But this, however, is a key initiative because the federal funding programs now require co-investment from the city. So the incentive programs within this CIP would address that municipal need for investment, and that would be the city's contribution. And then also the program is, the way the program is set up is to address other city building objectives and initiatives the city is looking at. Again, as a quick reminder, this is the one highlighted in red. It is one of many tools related to housing and affordability that the city is looking at or already practicing. The CIP identifies a missing position between those who have the income security programs in things like community housing and market housing. So this is that middle income type. Again, how we get to that is we have to look at incomes, the cost of housing, and then see how well they match. So very briefly, this is to show, based on household types, renter households, owners, one person, what their median annual income is. And then by the CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, their definition is that no more than 30% of your income should go to your housing. So then the bottom row there, we've identified what 30% would be monthly. So that's what these different types of households, the middle income in there would be able to afford. So then we also look at what the actual unit types would cost compared to what you can afford. And this is a study that's updated every year to reflect market rents and update things that you see in the census. So a one bedroom right now, over $1,000, and the 4 bedroom or more, over $2,000, as you can see. So very quickly, this graph is intended to show the first through 10th there is deciles or tenths of population. This is renter households. So each one is about 6,500 households. As you can see there, then the next row, 300, 460, that is what that 30% every month would be for that tenth of the renter household population. And then the ones in yellow show what that average is. So you actually get to the median income before renter households can afford a bachelor, or only the 7th through 10th can afford the 2-bedroom or more. So there is indeed a gap, and yes, some of them can have access to community housing, but what you can see there is still a lot of room for those who would require some sort of affordable program, as would be identified through a CIP. So I won't go through all of these, but the CIP, again, it can do all sorts of things that a city is not otherwise allowed to do because of things in the Municipal Act, including offering incentives. We have done consultation through the fall and through the summer since we last came to you, and we found that those initial upfront costs are the largest barrier to developing affordable units. So the intention is to reduce some of those barriers as well as create more affordable units, support the work of the LMCH and others, and also find opportunities within existing neighborhoods. So out of that, what's proposed is two loan programs, an affordable housing development loan program, which would be tied to multi-residential, and then a secondary dwelling unit loan program. We'll be referring to the first one as program number 1, the secondary dwelling unit is number 2. So for the first one here, it's designed to address multiple objectives. There's 3 different levels of loan program, and they're based on the geographic location of where those developments are proposed, the level of affordability, and then whether or not the proponent is paying property tax. So the intention is that by looking at the location, you can tie it to things like the city structure plan, areas where there's high growth intended, rapid transit, recognition of the climate emergency, and the fact that not only is transportation the second highest cost to most households after the housing itself, but how you commute and how you have access to jobs and services has a great impact on your household budget as well as the environment. The second category is the actual level of affordability, and we've proposed 3 different categories there relative to the average market rent, and then whether or not the proponent is paying city property tax to recognize that there are carrying costs for them. Now, most would pay it, but there's certain nonprofits who do not pay city property tax. It wouldn't be schools or other things, but it's the city property tax. So this is what it looks like, and this is what it's proposed. So they would be loan programs between $10,000 and $20,000, depending on those sorts of criteria. So the locational ones, downtown, rapid transit corridors, the primary transit area, or closed school sites, because those recognize unique opportunities within established areas, established neighborhoods. And then other kinds of criteria, I won't get into all the details, but these would be intended as interest-free loans, paid at the time of building permit, repayment starting approximately around the time of building occupation, about 3 years afterwards. This is also intended to tie into some of the changes that are coming through the province through Bill 108, how they're now collecting development charges at the time of building occupation rather than the time of building permit, and some other actions that the province is looking at that are supportive of these same sorts of initiatives. And then for the second one, the secondary dwelling unit program, also proposed to be up to $20,000. Based on the value of the works, interest-free loan as well, a portion forgivable, to be owner-occupied, and also a rental license to be required. So that is to ensure that it could be used as its own self-contained unit and not just finishing a basement for someone. But not required to then, also not permitted to have it as a short-term rental such as an Airbnb. So again, as Mr. Fleming noted, this is a 2-step process. There's both the actual community improvement plan itself, so reviewing the objectives, the monitoring, what sort of measures we'll be checking in on throughout, adopting bylaws where it will apply, and then there's the budget and funding of it and financing. So that can be subject to change throughout its life and through monitoring, so changes to programs, and it can respond to different needs as they come up. But where that, again, has to be part of that multi-year budget process. So we're proposing this as a revolving loan fund, so there would be that initial contribution to start it up, and that's that discussion that would have to be part of that evaluation with the business cases, the rest of them in the spring. So there is some time sensitivity to this because we're looking to have the final CIP in place so that we can have this reviewed and discussed in the spring as part of the rest of the budget and the business cases. And then it's intended to be a revolving loan fund, so self-paying once loans are repaid. So again, we are here to seek council's direction on those key considerations of the plan itself and the program, take your feedback, continue with consultations, until the end of the year, aiming to report back by the end of January, timing it so that not only can this meet the timing for multi-year budget, but so that loan agreements can be entered into after the budget's established, which would be April. And again, the importance in that is that people can stack this and have access to federal funding now that the federal funding requires city investment. So this would be the city's contribution. And again, it's also intended to align with other city objectives around rapid transit and climate change and the way the London Plan is structuring city growth. And that is all. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Very quickly, one last piece. We spoke with the development industry, we spoke with affordable housing developers, and they told us a couple of things. One is there's a big pot of money out there, which is the co-investment funding from CMHC. So it's federal dollars, but the only way to unlock it is you need to have a municipal contribution that's going along with the project as well. And this would qualify. So it's a loan program. It's a very efficient way for us to leverage those federal dollars. The second thing that we heard is that one of the biggest barriers to affordable housing development is upfront cash. So it's the ability to get through the development financing piece, to pay the permitting fees, to pay the development charges, those sorts of things. So again, this program is designed to give them that access to that kind of funding upfront so they can get their construction, and then after the projects are constructed, they tend to be in a very good position going forward. And finally, we looked at all kinds of different ways of financing through a CIP, affordable housing, waiving development charges or waiving permit fees, those sorts of things. And we felt this was the most efficient way and flexible way that we could do so, where there's a loan based on units, based on other multiple objectives, but a loan that goes to the affordable housing developer that then could be used for any of those things. They can decide how they best want to use it.
Thank you, Mr. Fleming, and thank you, Mr. Macbeth, too, and thank you for the report. It's a lot of good information here. I know we had the presentation, so I will go to the committee. Any questions? Councillor Squire?
I'm happy to move this and have it move on in the process, but I have to say how impressed I am with this report. What you've done is, first of all, you identify what you're trying to do. You don't say, we're trying to solve the entire problem. You do a really great job of saying, here's what we're trying to do, here's how we're trying to do it, and here's why we think it's the best approach. So there's no overreaching, there's no saying we're gonna change the world, but there's things in it that really remind me, and I hope you don't mind saying, of my time with Habitat for Humanity. In other words, the revolving loan idea. In other words, that the money that you're repaying is going to go out to other people in a similar situation. I really like it that largely this is going to help people who may already be experts in the area. In other words, we're not trying to say, look, we're going to start being developers and do the development of affordable housing, but we're going to help the people that know how to do it. This is going to be a great benefit to the Indwells, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, people who are out there doing this right now. And what they always say to me is, we know how to do it. We know how to access the money. We just need that little bit of help. So I'm happy that this came to us. I think it's a really, really good report. It's an important report, and it fits together, and it really makes it easy for me as a councillor to go out and say, here's what the city is doing. Here's something that we're doing. Because right now I get a lot of solve that affordable housing problem. Get that problem solved. And with this kind of report, I can say, well, here's something we're doing, and here's why we think it's a good idea. So thank you very much for this report. And this is my last planning committee meeting, and it's a nice report to get at the end of that.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very happy to support this as well. Just a couple of quick questions. Just, I guess, to the level of funding that's required. I don't know. Maybe I missed it as I went through the total proposed fund for Program 1. Program 2 shows $250,000 as proposed, but what is it for number 1?
Through the chair, the business case, we have identified it, but and even in the consultations with the stakeholders, we have identified a number, but we wanted to bring it back as part of the multi-year budget to confirm it against all the other budget asks.
Fair enough. So number 2 would be with respect to the second one. Actually, both 1 and 2. the $250,000 pot seems to propose a kind of a minimum number of about 12 units per year that could be supported through that. $20,000, $250,000 gets me to $240,000 plus maybe one more, so 13. If they were all the lower level, then you might have a bit more opportunity for more units. So it's, I think what we're doing in general, okay.
I can say, Madam Chair, that, again, remembering this is a loan fund, so the money would be coming back, it goes out and then is returned. We're thinking that envelopes of $3 million are kind of useful to understand 150 to 200 units. And that's a blend of the two programs and a blend of the different types of loans. It all depends on where an application comes in, how it conforms with the criteria as to what the value of the loans would be. And again, that's the initial outlay, and then that would come back over time. And as Councillor Squire indicated, that could be used again if it's a revolving loan fund to fund future units. But that will give you a sense of the magnitude of units that you could support for an envelope of about $3 million. So when you see the business case coming forward, and I think Mr. Macbeth was masterful in not answering the question, as he's kind of been asked not to until we bring the multi-year budget forward with the full budget and all of the comparables in front of you.
No, I appreciate that, and I think that's fair, especially on the revolving part. It works, and then we can use that with reserves that we have, right, rather than necessarily, and our lost opportunities on interest that we might have, or the ability to move that someplace else. So having that cycle is helpful. And I think I heard it said in here that really, I mean, the $20,000 max on Plan 1 compared to the $20,000 max on Plan 2. The $20,000 on Plan 2 allows the contribution of 1 unit, whereas the Plan 1 is a minimum of 5 units. So it has it's a smaller investment per unit on a per unit basis, but I think what I'm hearing through all that is it allows for significant leveraging of senior level government funding. And is there a ratio or something of municipal contribution to what the other levels of government would give? What's that multiplier that might be realized as we put forward funds?
Madam Chair, I don't think we have people in the room to answer that fully. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. I can ask that later, but that would just be my observation to it. I think this is great. I think I was talking earlier today about this, and there's really no magic bullet to our affordable housing issues. It's going to take a number of strategies and a number of approaches. This is a strong one, and I think it fits quite well in the tool belt that we're starting to build, and I thank you for bringing this forward.
Mayor Holder.
Thank you, Chair. Look, we know the challenges of affordable housing in our city. I mean, I think those have been pronounced very clear. To me, this is a very creative program, and also the test is going to be the uptake on these loans from our development community. That, to me, ultimately, they say the proof in the pudding is in the eating. But you know, I'm optimistic, and I would and let me just say to staff, thank you very much. I think this is a great tool to support and incent that affordable housing. And the fact that it unlocks upper tier cash, I think that's really the critical key to this. So thank you all for your efforts in putting this forward. This really, I think, has the opportunity to make a sincere difference for affordable housing in our city.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. I think it's a good report. I look forward to the comments from people. I wanted to flag a couple of things for staff to consider. First, I want to talk about the secondary dwelling unit loan program, and colleagues who are on CAPS would recall that in the past I've declared an interest around Airbnb, because I've actually rented my house out, and I think I might do that again in the future if I'm away. This issue where it's a secondary dwelling unit, I checked with the Integrity Commissioner. I don't have any plans to build one. I don't have one. I'm not planning to rent one out, so I don't have the same pecuniary interest, even though we're talking about Airbnb again. I'm not sure that that's such a wise thing to include the prohibition. Whether somebody is earning income to have a short-term rental or some combination of short-term rentals and affordable units, like the way that those rental properties support affordability is they provide an income stream to the homeowner on their main dwelling, right? And so I would just caution that that's maybe not a great idea to have this outright prohibition, because even if someone came in and they have the affordable unit and they agree to it for 20 years, there's nothing stopping them from then doing an Airbnb after that. And I think it might get more of them built in the first place. So I just wanted to flag it. I'm not sure that it's necessary. Because I see the primary advantage is that it's supporting the affordability of the primary residence rather than the secondary dwelling unit itself. The second point I want to make is about the first one, the loan program. And, this is a 15 data point chart of all the different ways you can combine to get different loan amounts. It seems kind of complicated. Like, that may be more complexity than is actually needed. The differences between these loan amounts is actually not that much. Between medium and high, we're talking $5,000, and we have this very complicated matrix to figure out where you go. And really, there's only 3 options, and a lot of them are the same thing. A lot of them are high. So I'm not sure how needed you need to have that kind of resolution on the design of the program. And the last thing I want to mention is the average market rent. And I think this is something that's going to require some careful consideration, but if we can get average market rents at a level of detail that is below the whole city, I think we need to consider that, because what is affordable in North London is different than what's affordable in Old East Village, and it's different than what's affordable in Oak Ridge. And I'm a little concerned if we pick the citywide average market rent and that's the threshold, that will kind of screen into all the areas that are essentially lower rent to begin with. That's where all the activity will happen, and very little will happen in the other areas that are higher rent, because the gap would be so far. The average market rent in West London is not the same as it is in other parts of the city. And so I think if we can get it on a regional level, I certainly can in the census. I just don't know how useful that is for our purposes. If you can get it from CMHC, based on their survey data, that might be much more useful than locking it in at the average for the whole city. And I think it might get a better distribution across the entire rapid transit corridor. I'm just thinking the west end of the transit village out there is very different than the east end of the transit village, for example. So I would just flag that. That might be something you want to consider. I don't think there needs to be a lot of specific areas, but maybe just a couple or a few that would make it a bit easier.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you through you to staff. Add my thanks to everybody else's. Great report. Great initiative moving forward. I know, we're the direction here is to continue working with stakeholders and all that. So that's great. Further to what Councillor Helmer, Deputy Mayor Helmer said, it's not just about creating that bigger gap in certain areas like the north. It's also about making it less affordable in areas where we could potentially see a much lower rent if we did like a zoning kind of average market rent rather than citywide. So that's an important point, and I'm glad he brought that up. So my concern is the affordability overall, and I like the program. I want to see us do as much as possible, but 99% of market rent as one of the, just when I look in the 3 loan value categories, and then with the chart about, whether they would be in the medium or the low or the high loan category, the last row in the table is 90 to 99% of average market rent. So we could, according to this table, then we would see somebody who's creating units at 99% of average market rent receive the highest value loan in the category. Am I reading that correctly?
Madam Chair, we were having a little bit of a conversation about your earlier comment. Could you repeat the question one more time for us, please? I'm sorry.
So according to the table on page something or other, sorry, it has the, less than 80% average market rate, or 80 to 89, or 90 to 99. And so my concern is that we would be giving possibly the highest loan category to somebody that's building and with a 99% of the average market rate. So basically average market rate, and they're getting the highest loan category.
I'll just start, and then I'll certainly, through you, Madam Chair, invite Mr. Macbeth to dive in. But this does relate to what Councillor Helmer raised, and that is that the average market rent is a citywide rent. And so if you look at 90 to 90% of the average market rent in the downtown or the transit villages, that is a significant reduction than what you would normally see units going for in those areas, the downtown, for example. And so it does make sense. If we were to go to the average market rent of the specific neighborhood in which the proposal is located, then maybe this chart looks different at that point.
So my concern with this and with your response through you, Madam Chair, is when you pair this with the actual affordability chart. So the median income of the average renter in London, what's considered affordable and what we're giving loans to a developer to build isn't actually affordable for, depending on the number of bedrooms, 40 to 50% of renters in London. So my concern is again, also added to that this is a first come, first serve program, or being proposed as first come, first serve. You have 40 to 50% of Londoners in the rental market unable to afford average market rent in the City of London at bachelor or one bedroom apartment. Forget about going for bigger apartments. So I'm concerned about that. I would like to see the program meet the needs of the average renter in the City of London as much as possible. And so it brings me to another question. We've done a lot of, not a lot, we've done some bonusing in the past, and we've done it based on average market rent. And if we were, and you probably won't have the answer to this, but my question is, even the units that have been created so far through bonusing, as a percentage of average market rent, how many of those are actually affordable according to the chart that's in this report? I really appreciate that chart. We've talked so much about affordability just based on what the rents are out there, but we don't really talk about affordability based on the incomes out there and the people that are actually in the rental market in the City of London.
Through the chair. So the AMR is not only, these are new units that are being constructed. The average market rent is based on all units. So what you'd find is that even if it's 100% of average market rent, this is creating new units, and new units don't go for average market rent generally. If you look at that chart and a bachelor says it's $900, bachelors in new towers could be $1,500 to $1,700. So there is a significant discount there. Whether or not it's enough to meet the income of needs of everyone, this isn't going to solve all the problems. It's part of that larger suite of tools we're looking at. But it's in part based on AMR for across the city, but it's also to recognize that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 affordable units that are needed across the city to actually address this everywhere. So we're looking at it as a means to start chipping away at the issue, and then with ongoing monitoring, if we need to adjust criteria or go to larger units or change the incentives, that's the purpose of the ongoing monitoring of the programs.
I could just add on to that what I'm hearing is a couple of things. First of all, make sure your average market rents and the percentages of those are geographically based, at least consider that. The second thing I'm hearing is, are we getting deep enough into the affordability? And so the purpose of bringing this forward today was to hear these very comments. So this is useful to us. We'll take it back. We'll talk with our partners that have a really rich understanding of the affordable housing market, and also along that spectrum where there's needs for different types of tools to hit different depths of affordability, and where this particular tool
should be targeted.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you. Sorry to jump in again. I just wanted to ask a really quick question about the chart that Mr. Macbeth has in his report with respect to the deciles of income versus the affordability. At what point in there is there a decile that we look at that would be the one where somebody's just not even going to be eligible to find something on the market that's affordable, and now we're talking about rent geared to income or social housing?
Through the chair, my understanding is less than 80, certainly less than 70 is that sort of category. Part of this is looking to have the private development community building affordable units, but there's a certain level of what can they actually construct them for, and recognizing that other tools and other agencies are those that might be better suited for addressing those with even deeper levels of affordability required. And also part of that graph, when you look at the red boxes, is that some of those have enough income where they could move to other parts of the city or different types of units to meet their needs. So it's not everyone in there is necessarily in as much of a crisis as it may seem. The point was to kind of shock, and I hope it worked. But because it's those, even the definition from the feds, it's low to moderate income. So if you're past the 60th percentile, then they are looking at you should have another option somewhere. It's those who don't have options to move somewhere else because of the pressures all the way up and down the entire system. Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful. I mean, as I read this, I would say the fourth decile would have the potential to be able to either pool resources through cohabitation, or to be able to find something that was well below market, or through a secondary dwelling unit or something like that, or geographically different areas within the city. So there might be opportunities there, but really beyond that, kind of getting into the third through to the first, those opportunities probably don't exist, and we're looking at RGI or supportive housing or social housing in some way. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments from the committee? I see none. Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you to staff for this. It was a great report. Just following up on some of the comments, I think the geographical factor is something that should be explored a little bit more. Just as a comment, going back to staff, I understand the way we do the bonusing now. For instance, an affordable unit in Byron is based on the London statistics, not on what a unit in Byron would be, which would be higher. And therefore, I think the broader stat would make it more affordable, as opposed to starting with a higher number in Byron, but having a lower number, and then the 90% or the 80 or 85% gives it more of an affordable unit. I just thinking of that out loud, I think we really need to explore that a little bit more, and how it works, and where the benefits are. The other thing, looking at different bedroom units numbers, I'm not sure if this is a new tool in our CIP. I know that conversation is going to continue, and we're really just looking at the funding formula right now to allow developers access to get into the not only municipal funding, but the provincial and the federal that will be matching all that. But it's something that, to me, having more units as opposed to one unit, more families, there'd be more wealth shared between more people as opposed to one. But I'm not sure. I'd like that explored a little bit more, if 2 or 3 bedroom units are more beneficial than, say, a bachelor in the community. It's just an interesting way, or that we need to kind of look at it from the whole. I'll just make those comments. I know we're going to have a public participation meeting coming to us in January. We will be having a business plan presented to us as we go through the funding process, so lots more work to come, but really appreciate a new tool in the kit when it comes to affordable housing. So I would like to go to the committee. Any other comments to receive the report? I guess, do I need a motion? Councillor Cassidy? And
I'll move the staff recommendation.
thank you, and Mayor Holder seconding.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Moving on to the added, which is the Latch report. I wonder if I can, any comments regarding the Latch report? Mr. Gagnon is still here to answer any questions. If not, I'm looking for a motion to receive the Latch report. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. And committee, I know we have it confidential, and we will leave from committee room number 3, so we'll not be coming back. So this is going to be my last time chairing the planning committee, and if I could just say a few words, since staff is here and I've got the chair. I just want to thank everyone for your support, committee especially. I always feel like we're a team. Staff, the work that you do is just amazing. And I'll just read a few things that we have done the past year, this committee in particular, starting with updates. We've had a number of updates like the Affordable Housing Development Planning Toolkit update, the Arvis Sanitary Servicing Agreement update, the Masonville, the Oakville update, the Upper Thames, Dingman Creek Subwatershed Screening Area updates, CIPs and Master Plan concepts. Of course, the Lambeth CIP, we approve that. The Lambeth Main Street Streetscape Master Plan, the Hamilton Road Streetscape Master Plan, study request for the Argyle BIA, CIPs for new measures and indicators of success, the Hyde Park Community Generation Investigation, moving to changes to our policies and guidelines. And for me, these are really important that we've made here with the rethink zoning terms of reference, the green roof area landscape open space requirements, the heritage register, the bird-friendly development that we just had tonight. But more important, the provincial proposed changes, Bill 108, I think is something that we as a planning committee had to deal with, the provincial changes. I know staff were heavily involved in all that. And of course, the draft city wide urban design guidelines. So we've had lots of stuff on our plate this year. I know there have been a number of subdivisions that are ongoing. We see them coming here throughout the year. A lot of them are in my ward, so I can easily talk about West 5, Eagle Ridge, Riverbend South, Silverleaf, Boswick. Those are continuing large subdivision developments, dreamers that have come through. I also just want to make a comment and really thank staff. I was lucky enough to be part of the Urban Design Awards this year and part of that panel. And I spent a full day with landscape architects, planners from other cities and designers, and I learned so much and had my eyes really open to all the development that's going on. And as a committee member, sitting here, seeing these applications come and really never knowing or where they are or seeing them was really a privilege and an honor, and just learned such great respect for the expertise that we have here in the city and that ongoing. From a personal point of view, I know, I just want to make this comment. I hope one day to be part of approving the London Plan. I've followed it for many years through SHIFT, through the Rethink London. We endorsed it last council, the London Plan. It's something that I know the work and the in-depth knowledge and how we really have changed and how we plan our city through the London process is really something that I know we have our debates, especially when it comes to infill, because, but moving in and up is where we've changed. The past 25, 30 years, we've been all about moving out, and the sprawling and the sustainability of that has caused us to really rethink and change. And the work that staff have done is something that I truly admire. So thank you. And Mr. Fleming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of staff and certainly open it to Mr. Yeoman as well if you want to say that through you. But we've really enjoyed working with you. The meetings that we have the day before or a couple days before, you always keep us on track and give us sage advice. We really appreciate that, and thank you for all the work that you've done. It's, people don't realize how hard the committee works and how much there is to cover and how much time and effort it takes. So we really appreciate the efforts of all of the committee, all of council, and yourself as chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to these two fine ladies beside me who I think help steer and guide our agendas, and thank you very much. And with that, I am looking to move into confidential. Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. And we will adjourn from committee room 3. Mayor Holder. Oh, sorry. Seconding? Thank you.